Beautiful. So I could see that you're very into philosophy, and I do listen to your podcast on Stoicism.
Yeah.
So definitely plug that anytime.
So, I mean, you happen to be very lucky because someone asked me on Facebook the other week, why are you interested in Stoicism as a Jew? And I was like, well, I can give you 263 answers because that was how many episodes I had, and so he said, but can you summarize it? So I made him an episode that this is, by the way, at the stoicjew.buzzsprout.com. That's where the podcast is. And so I made an episode where I identified 5, again, this is asking me to boil it down, but there are five, I guess, themes, principles, ideas that I have found resonant in Stoicism and that complement Judaism. I'm gonna say them really quickly. Again, there's a whole episode about this, but the 5 are, I'll say them all in one shot and then I'll briefly explain each one. Is acceptance of reality, number 1. Number 2, distinguishing between what we can and can't control. Number 3, recognizing how much of our suffering is the result of our own decisions and thinking. 4, premeditatio malorum, which means the premeditation of evils or harms. And then 5 is memento mori, is remembering that you're mortal, that you can die. So number 1, acceptance of reality, which I don't touch Stoic metaphysics. I'm really interested in Stoic ethics, and not ethics is even the wrong word, because I say ethics and you think interpersonal relationships, which is part of it. Really, it's how to live.
Well, it's like the ethics of Pirkei Avot.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
about obviously influenced. It's obviously influenced by that. Yeah.
Right. So there is a little known definition of fear of Hashem. Okay. So if you had asked me, in my early days in yeshiva, what is the definition of Yiras Hashem? I would quote you the Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah 2:1 and 2, talking about Yiras Hashem that comes from contemplating the Chachma in the universe and then realizing how small of a being you are, which is the flip side of the coin of Avas Hashem, being drawn to knowledge. And I still hold by that definition. But there's a definition that Shlomo HaMelech gives in Mishlei that people don't know. Number 1, because people don't learn Mishlei enough. But number 2, because I think I haven't counted. It's literally in the middle of the book, though. Okay, which is Mishlei 15:33. It's the last pasuk in chapter 15. Yiras Hashem musar chachma, v'lifnei kavod anava. So the fear of Hashem is the discipline of wisdom. Okay, and that's how he defines Yiras Hashem. All right, and this is echoed in the pasuk that is more well known. Yiras Hashem reishis da'as chachma umusar evilim bazu. That fear of Hashem is the beginning of knowledge, and Mishlei, fools scorn wisdom and discipline, and the Mefarshim there say that, that Yiras Hashem is synonymous with the Yiras Hashem that is the beginning of knowledge is the Musar Chachma that fools scorn. So it's the same thing. But that definition of Yiras Hashem being the discipline of wisdom means that the foundational level of Yiras Hashem, Rambam's talking about the mitzvah of Yiras Hashem and the highest level. The foundational level is recognizing that I am a rational being who lives in a world of lawfulness, designed by the Creator, and I have to subordinate myself to that lawfulness, to that chachma, and that's the basis of it, and it's the basis of knowledge because that's the world you live in. We don't value knowledge for its we value knowledge for its own sake. We don't value pure intellectual knowledge. We hold that you should live according to your knowledge, that you should subordinate yourself to your chachma and to your understanding, of reality. And so that's what really attracted me to Stoicism, because acceptance of reality is the name of the game there. They don't talk, obviously they don't have the idea of Hashem, but that's the first pillar of Stoicism. And closely related, I'll give you a second to interject, but just the second pillar is very closely related, of accepting what's in your control and what's not in your control. So the clear statement of that is Epictetus in the beginning of the Enchiridion, which is the handbook, which is I did not prepare. Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, on the one hand, he says, on the one hand, there are things that are in our power, whereas other things are not in our power. In our power are opinion, impulse, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is our own doing. Things not in our power include our body, our possessions, our reputations, our status, and in a word, whatever is not our own doing. Now, this is the basis of again, Yiras Hashem, Hakol b'dei Shemayim chutz miyiras Shemayim. We can't control anything except for Yiras Shemayim, which the Rambam says means bechira, right? You can just control your will, and that's it. this is the basis of Mishlei. Mishlei is all about, well, I guess we're going to talk about Mishlei later. Mishlei is all about decision making, and you have to be able to assess what's in your control and what's not in your control, and only focus on the areas that are within your control. And then bitachon, this is another area, trusting in God, that comes for areas that are not in your control. All of tefillah is dependent on this, of constantly assessing what is in my control and what is not, and recognizing how little is in my control and turning to Hashem for assistance in that area. This is base of Tehillim, so this is what I mean when I say that Stoicism complements Judaism, because the Stoics were working on these things, as almost like as an end in and of themselves. And so they really flesh it out. And for us, we work on these things, but we don't always talk it out in as great detail as the Stoics did, because that was the whole emphasis there. And for us, it's part and parcel of the whole system.
It's basically Pirkei Avot on steroids, because it's really
you can look at it that way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and really based on kind of adding to what you said about how understanding reality as the starting point. That's kind of that's a very Jewish concept. Obviously, understanding that Hashem is one, right? The first commandment that no Hashem, but then the second commandment is that there are no other gods, because we want to understand Hashem as the ultimate reality.
Right.
And the problem that I see today with a lot of Jews is that they don't have this fundamental understanding that if you don't have a clear understanding of what God is not, right? Yeah. Then you end up in a false. You kind of view reality in a false kind of way, because you start seeing God as this vending machine in the sky who, I'm going to twist his arm and he's going to serve me with what I need, which is, kind of similar to Avodah Zarah in a way, but it's a very childish view. And it's also, you see kind of they treat God as almost like a junkie who needs things from us. And if we do things, then God gets his fix. Yeah, and right. This distortion of reality is actually extremely damaging, because it's the ikar of Judaism. And if you already miss that point, everything else becomes kind of infected by that. Right. So I feel that the Stoics, whether they were referring to God or nature or whatever it is, we can insert God in if people have a problem reading those parts of Stoicism that's talking about nature or whatever it is, or the deity. Really what it is that it's a perfect building block to understanding the world and reality that we live in. And then like we mentioned before, the Rambam said that you can take wisdom from any place. Right. That's exactly what we're supposed to learn from them. We're supposed to learn that you can use this as a foundation, and you can apply it to kind of like what you mentioned with Bruce Lee. It can apply to all parts of life. Right. So I'm gonna agree with you, and I'm gonna disagree. So I agree with everything you said about with the what Hashem is not and about Zarah. And I'm actually gonna quote to you something that I have a feeling, we just met, but I have a feeling you're gonna like this. I think this was a Tisha B'Av shir that Rabbi Chait gave one year, when either someone asked him or this was part of the shir, what is the essence of Avodah Zarah? Okay, what's the definition or essence of Avodah Zarah? And he said, relating to the products of your psyche as a reality. Okay, and that's exactly what you're describing, is that people have wishes and they have fears and they have imaginations about their own sense of power. And so no one is actually so delusional to think that they can control the rain, but they just project all of their own power fantasies onto God, and then project the way that they relate to him, project the way they have a way of relating to themselves, they have a way of relating to other people, a way of relating to their parents, and then they just project that all onto God. So that's not halakhic avodah zarah, but that's the root of it. And I do think that if a person, to the extent that you have a clear, Yedias Hashem, to the extent that you can know God, I mean, insert whatever your ideas of knowledge of God there, then you're going to be stripping away those false ideas and ways of relating to reality. Area where I not disagree. I guess the statement you're making about that's the benefit of Stoicism, yeah, it's the benefit, but it's also the danger, because I when I said I am not interested in Stoic metaphysics and just in ethics, maybe there's a listener who's going to say, wait a minute, you can't just ignore the metaphysics, and I agree,
that because metaphysics is the foundations of everything, you can never know for sure. Sometimes it's clear when Stoic metaphysics are affecting their ethics, but you can never know for sure. And like, there's always this danger that I'm concerned about, that there's going to be, non-Jewish metaphysics that creep in. Some people say that that's what happened to the Rambam. Like, you can't. It's not like this is a unique danger in Stoicism. You're going to.
You have the same thing with Gnosticism and Kabbalah. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we're at this point where I think in humanity, and this might be a controversial statement, but we're at this point in humanity where like perhaps there was a time, right after the Midbar, where like you could preserve like just the influence of Torah, and even then not really, because like you're coming with the influences of Mitzrayim, but you take the most insular Jewish communities on earth, and people might think that they are like not being influenced by these non-Jewish ideas, but they are, because it's impossible not to be, and that's part of why I think that it is for, I'm not going to say this for everybody, but for lots of people to, to a certain extent lean in and follow the approach of Kabbalah Misha Amro, like accept the truth from whoever says it, but like be aware of what your premises are and constantly try to question your premises and see if you are accidentally accepting like these premises. And that's really the most you can do. You can never know for sure.
Yeah. And that's why we rely on Masorah and Halacha. We can't veer off too much. It gives us kind of the filtering system to right. But I actually, I do agree. When I was making my statement, I was talking about the ethics, not the metaphysics. But it's an important distinction to make.
Right. And by the way, and that's also why it's the Stoic Jew podcast, not the Jewish Stoic podcast, because it's in the framework of Judaism. This is not like a yin yang thing where it's like, oh, let's combine Judaism and Stoicism. No, this is this is examining Stoic ideas through my Jewish lens. And that's really what every episode is I usually take the style of the podcast is I usually root it in a text from the Stoics. I talk about what they mean or what I think they mean, and then compare and contrast that to similar statements and ideas in Judaism, which sometimes it's about finding the commonality. Sometimes it's about showing how like Judaism is very different, and this is what Stoicism gets wrong. And then many of these episodes, because I'm always trying to apply things to my own life, and that's my whole orientation towards Torah, is examining these ideas through the lenses of like my, of what's going on in my life right now, So for example, like I thought I was going to have time to do this before our interview. I was like, I found myself being nervous about like appearing on like someone else's podcast, and like I don't know what your audience is like. I don't know who's going to see this, and then thinking about like being judged by people, and then realizing like how ridiculous that is, like on many levels, and then like going into stuff from like Hovos Halavovos about like integrity and being concerned about what other people think, and then like going into other ideas in other areas of Stoicism. So that's the type of thing that I would talk about, is seeing what I'm dealing with right now through the lenses of Stoicism and Judaism.
That's very Marcus Aurelius of you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The ruler of the world is telling us he had everything at his disposal and just telling us that stop worrying about what other people think,
Yeah.
So you were going to get into, you said the first two parts.
So really quickly, I want to dwell on it. So the other three were recognizing how much of our own suffering is the result of our own decisions and thinking. Best way to express this really is the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim 3:12, where he talks about the three categories of Ra. Now, I know people, I really get irked whenever I teach this, because in English, you have to commit to translating Ra as like evil or badness or harm. You can't, like in Hebrew though, it's like the term encompasses all of these things. So the three types of ra'os that can befall us, and he says, spoiler alert, the three categories are, ra that comes about from the fact that we are physical beings living in a physical world that's subject to entropy. All physical things have limitations, all physical things wear down in time, all physical organisms die. So we are in a physical world, and like the only way you can escape that is if you were not physical, So if you want to like be a human being, and like if you want to if you fall and scrape your knee, and then you get upset because you scraped your knee and it hurts. So what would you want? Would you want a knee that is like made of steel? Like, well, then your skin can't grow, so like, you can't have your physical, you can't have your physical be in a physical world without any limitations. Category 2 is ra that people cause to each other using their own free will, and category 3, which the Rambam says is the most numerous, is the ra that we cause ourselves through our own decision making. Either through like doing actions that bring about consequences that harm us, or by having false views of reality that increase our suffering. And this is why I love Mishlei as well, because both Mishlei and Stoicism focus on again, only focusing on what's in your own control and making the most intelligent, beneficial decisions you can, and the least harmful decision, avoiding the least harmful decisions. So it's like Stoicism is like the training ground for what Shlomo HaMelech is teaching in Mishlei, and there's great overlap in the subjects. So that's like number 3.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And so then you said 4 and 5. 4
and 5 really quickly are premeditatio malorum, which is thinking about things before they happen, the bad things that can happen, in order to practically prepare and then to mentally prepare so that they don't come as a shock. And again, this is all of Mishlei. This is, Ezehu Chacham Haroa, well, and that's not in Mishlei. Ezehu Chacham Haroa es Hanola, that's in Maseches Tamid, Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, I think. And then Mishlei Ashrei Adam Mafachei Tamid. What's the other part of the puzzle here? Hold on, I gotta look at my notes. Asher Adam Mafachei Tamid Umakshe Libo Yipol Bara'a. Happy or praiseworthy is the person who is constantly fearful or apprehensive, but one who makes his heart stubborn will fall into evil. That also happens to be Bruce Lee. The oak tree is mighty, yet it will be destroyed by a mighty wind because it resists the elements. The bamboo bends with the wind and by bending survives. But the idea being that if you think about what could happen to you and you mentally prepare for it and decision-making wise prepare for it, then you will not be as harmed. Either you'll avoid it altogether, or when it comes, you won't be as harmed. And that's, again, that's all Mishlei. That's, Yaakov, preparing for his confrontation with Esav. And then number 5 is memento mori, is remembering your mortality, remembering that you're going to die. And again, tons of statements in Judaism about this. Kohelet, tov lelachas al beis elo milachas al beis mishteh. Better to go to a house of mourning than a house of partying. Ba'asher hu sof kol ha'adam v'hachai yitian libo. That's the end of every man, and the living will take it to heart. This is a kavya ben mahalal. Contemplate 3 things. He's talking. Know 3 things and you won't come to sin. Know where you came from, where you're going, and before whom you're going to give judgment. This is a good example, by the way, of where we differ from Stoicism, because Stoicism talks about the first one. So where do you come from? From a putrid drop, right? Where are you going? Limikom offer of rima v'solea, to a place of worms, dirt, worms, and maggots. So Stoicism has that. They don't have lifnei mi ata asi litin din b'cheshbon. Who are you going to give a reckoning and judgment before? Lifnei melech malchei melachim hakadosh baruch hu. So I don't know if I've made an episode about this, but I would talk about like what are the ramifications of the fact that Stoicism has 2 out of 3. Like, it's not a quantitative difference. That's going to change. That number 3 is going to change the other 2 as well.
Right, of course, and yeah. The first, their view can also work with like atheism or agnosticism, but right. So the thing is, they're not answering to anybody, and what is shaping our morality should be that we are, we are not the ultimate reality, and there's a God above, or quote unquote above, and I think that's beautifully said, and I actually want to know more